Hello, friends, and welcome to today's episode. Brigette Jones is our incredible guest today. And when I tell you you are about to receive an education, just be prepared. So, just so you are all aware, I know I mentioned this briefly as we start the episode, but I met Brigette because she spoke at a incredible event with the Moth where she shared her story. Um, we'll talk a little bit more about that story here, but it is so important, especially for this particular podcast that is all about bringing people on to share their story. It is extra special to me that we got to meet through a storytelling experience. So let me tell you just a little bit about Brigette. Brigette Janea Jones is the Director of Equitable Partnerships for the Belle Meade Historic Site and Winery in Nashville, also known as the Belle Meade Plantation. She's the founder of Bridge Builders Historical Consulting, and her work centers the ethical interpretation of American chattel slavery and its long-lasting effects on the Black American experience. She founded her Bridge Builders historical consulting company to assist companies and communities in the hard conversations necessary to address race and racism in a controlled but direct and action-oriented manner. In this episode, we talk about so many different things, but in particular, I thought it was so important for us to talk about the activating power of empathy in creating and building healing pathways for us to understand the painful history of what American chattel slavery was and still continues to live on as in this legacy today. And also how important it is for each and every one of us to be able to understand how that impacts our individual journey and the power that we have to rectify and heal generational trauma and patterns of harm and meet the need for healing. So in this episode, we talk about so many different things, but in particular, if you are somebody that is trying to figure out how to have more important conversations around history and race and how we can create a future that is honoring the past, grounded in the present, but also hopeful for the future, Brigette drops so many incredible nuggets of wisdom here about that. But also one of the biggest things, if you've listened to this episode, this podcast before, you know, she talks about and walks about living a life in authenticity. So she is so authentic in so many different aspects of this conversation, but just in the way that she lives and breathes and operates in her life. And so I hope as you're listening to this, you feel even more permission or inspiration to get closer to who you are as your authentic self and understand what it is for you to be able to activate the unique gifts, the unique callings, and that thing that you know that you're meant to do. She talks about all of these nudges and these, I got to do this. There's no question in my mind, this is what I've been put here to do. If you have those moments and those feelings in your life right now, I really encourage you to let this episode be the additional nudge. Even if you feel like you're just one person, Brigette talks a lot about what the power of activating and honoring the power of you as an individual is in relation to healing the collective, supporting the collective, and manifesting a future that you'd like to see. So without further ado, here is the incredible conversation I had with Brigette. Brigette, thank you so much for joining Checkbox Other. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
And those of you, I don't think no. Okay, so Brigette and I are meeting for the first time together virtually right now doing this podcast, but I had the incredible honor of listening to Brigette share a story at one of the amazing Moth events. And so we're going to talk a lot about that today. But before we hop into that version of storytelling, Brigette, I would love for you to share what I like to call the Cliff Notes version of your journey. Twists, the turns, the aha moments, and the things that have led you to where you are and who you are today.
Man, so I am originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and for people who don't know, Memphis is a predominantly Black city filled with lots of Black culture. So I always grew up with this richness of the Black experience. And so when I decided to go to college, I knew that I wanted to major in Black history because I come from the home of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and Stacks and Bill Street. And I wanted to focus on that. So when I graduated, I was like, okay, I want to be a historian. And I just so happened to get hired at a historic plantation, which was not in the plan, but for people who've been to college, you know, when you graduate, you just need a job, any job. Like I just wanted a job in my field. And from working at Belle Meade, that eventually turned into me curating something called Journey to Jubilee, which is a tour experience that centers the lives of the enslaved on the Belle Meade Plantation property. And that has just spiraled into speaking engagements and TV and podcasts. And it's become a wonderful whirlwind that I'm so excited to be on the journey of. So yeah, and here I am today talking to you.
Heck yeah. Well, see, I'm already covered with chills. I told you, my body tells me things before we start. So the question that I ask everybody when they join is, can you tell me about a time, more than one, you're more than welcome to share that, where you have felt, quote, other, different, or as though you didn't belong, and how that has kind of impacted your life up to this point?
I think feeling other is the story of my life. So I think the first time was when I was in the maybe 8th grade. I'm from Memphis born, but my father works for the military. So for quite a while, we lived in a small town called Columbus, Georgia, which is for military people, Fort Benning. And we moved back to Memphis. So definitely felt other right then in that moment. But a couple years later, I've assimilated to Memphis. I've been coming here for my childhood, like for Christmas and stuff, but now I live here. And coming from pretty much white military town to all Black inner city, other. I was very other. Even as a Black girl, I sounded different. I was very country in my diction, whereas Memphis is a little bit more street. And then in the 8th grade, I was accepted into the Memphis Youth Symphony because I played the violin. I did. Yeah, I played, like, I guess at that level would be like semi-professional. And definitely other, because I went from playing in an all-Black orchestra to being in kind of the cream of the crop of young violinists in the city of Memphis. And I think it may have been like 4 Black kids in the entire symphony. And coming into that arena as someone who picked up the violin in the 7th grade and excelled at it and made all city in the 8th grade and Memphis Youth Symphony in the 8th grade. Now I'm competing against kids who've been playing the violin since they were 4.
Born with it in their hand. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was definitely other in that perspective. And I think the next time around, I didn't feel like an other until I got to Belle Meade and realizing very quickly that I was the Black girl working at a plantation in 2016, and nobody knew what to do with their feelings around that, because it was a very obvious, I guess, dichotomy between the past and the present.
Right. Oh my goodness. It's so fascinating because so often when I ask the question about other, there are those moments. It's kind of like your life flashing before your eyes, but it's like, okay, here's the first time I recognized, oh, this feeling. And now as an adult, I can recognize what that was. But it is really powerful because as you're talking about the violin for yourself, I hear like my body, I'm like, that's like prodigy level stuff. You're like, I'll pick this thing up. And then masterfully, you're like, oh yeah,
I'm pretty good at
this. Nobody just put it in my hand until I was 12. Got it. Like, that's such a powerful element of witnessing kind of the capacity that you have within you that isn't activated until the opportunity presents itself. And so I think that's so incredibly powerful. And at least for me, at least the way I look at the world and why I hold space for us to talk about this is like, there's an opportunity at all times for us to discover parts of ourselves that were either they were lying dormant or they weren't allowed to exist, spread their wings for a whole slew of reasons. And so I just feel like that's extremely, extremely powerful. And I think that a lot of times this comes from this, the other story does come from changing place. It's one of those things that we get out of our own normal into a different normal that you're like, okay, this should be normal to me, but it's not. And how fascinating that is. Again, the obsession I have with how we as human beings have the ability to evolve very fast, that we can recognize and we can assimilate, and how that can be a beautiful thing. And also it can erase parts of ourselves. And so I feel like that's such a powerful element of all of those stories that you just shared. Even though they were brief, they were very pivotal and also so universal in so many aspects of how we interact with life.
Yeah, they shaped me in so many ways. I think that to come from inner city urban America and be placed in spaces later in life that are usually predominantly white. I consider myself, I guess, kind of like a chameleon, because you can put me anywhere and I can fit in for the most part. I'm just as hood as I am articulate, and I cherish both sides of myself. It's not like I look down on this side of myself because it's not professional enough for this environment, because all of that gives me the uniqueness and the authenticity that I hold. So I think that it's very important to hold space for people's authentic selves. Like, whoever you are, you should have the freedom to be that, and the experiences that shape that are just as important as who you are, because you wouldn't be who you are without those experiences.
Okay. So get my notebook. Let me write that down. Yeah, I feel like that is such a wonderful kind of transition into what brought you to Belle Meade? What brought you to a plantation as being the first, only, and different, oftentimes is spoken of as being somebody that is like representing something that has not been represented in a space, in particular on a plantation in Tennessee, being like, hey, there's a whole part of this story that's not being told, a whole level of representation that's not being acknowledged as humanity, not being honored in its full sense of, there were a whole bunch of other people that weren't being seen as full human beings. Can you talk a little bit about what it was? I know in your talk, you talked a little bit about this. In your mock talk, I went through like every emotion through my whole body. I hope that those of you listening will get a chance to witness. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how your kind of introduction to Belle Meade came about. And as you're talking about, like, I wasn't expecting to work there. Like, how did all that kind of, it's not a meet cute, but how did all of that kind of come together?
Yeah, man, I consider it like divine timing in every way. I think there's a line in a J. Cole song that says that if you let it kill your dream, it'll haunt you. And I wholeheartedly believe that it'll haunt you and it'll chase you. So I grew up knowing that my family was enslaved in Grand Junction, Tennessee, which is a very small rural West Tennessee town. Of course, I was raised in Memphis, which is like an hour away from Grand Junction. So my memory of going to Grand Junction is like funerals for my grandmother's siblings, a couple family reunions, random trips in the summer, nothing too big. But still growing up, kind of hearing the stories, and eventually being old enough to be like, wait a minute, you said this was the plantation that we was on?
Right.
So we were enslaved there, and we still coming back here. We still live here in certain capacities. So that was like wild to me, right? And so I was very interested in race relations, have been my whole life. As my introduction to racism was when I was 5, and I think that piqued my interest into like, okay, so why do you feel this way about me? And I'm just a kid, like, what's the thing? And then as I got older, it just sparked, like, I've read a lot, and I've always been interested in genealogy and historiography and just all the things I was interested in anything old. I loved it. I was a very odd kid, I guess.
I would have hung out with you for sure.
Very odd, way too mature for my age. But when I got to college, I knew that I wanted to major at first in communications. I wanted to do broadcast journalism, and then got there and was like, this is too many people. Everybody's talented. No, I need a smaller pond. Yeah. And so when I went over to history, I was like, this was it. And I got to immerse myself in like history and sociology. And then I graduated and was like, well, you ain't had an internship. You ain't done nothing but be popular for the last 4.5 years, girl. What you gonna do? And passed a sign one day with my fiance in the car that read Belle Meade Plantation. And I was like, oh, we should go take a tour of the plantation. And he was like, hell no. I'm not going there. It's 2015. I'm Black. No. And I had an attitude, and I mean, I'm a Leo, so my attitude is like, when it's there, it's there. And so I came home and took a nap, and he woke me up and was like, get dressed, we're gonna go somewhere. And that somewhere happened to be Belle Meade. And my tour guide was this wonderful girl who's one of my closest friends now. Her name is Erica. And halfway through the tour, as she's dressed as an antebellum mistress of a plantation era home, this little Black girl with a fro walk up and say, I can do this job. And she was like, oh, okay. well, here's an email. I emailed that email address 7 million times until that email address responded for an interview. And I did the interview about a month later, got hired the same day. And that's how it happened initially. Over time, I left Belle Meade. I got pregnant. I left, went to grad school, decided that teaching middle school children was also not my ministry. God had not called me for that either. And I was going to go back to Belle Meade, and I went back, and that's when Journey to Jubilee was at the very early stages of becoming. And they were like, if you come back, did you want to do this? And I was like, hell yeah. And here we are.
Here we are. Can you talk a little bit about Journey to Jubilee?
Yeah.
What that all entails?
So initially, Journey to Jubilee was a research project, and it was to literally just find information about the people who had been enslaved. So we had lots of pictures, documents, lots of primary and secondary sources. And we were trying to figure out, so now that we have all this information and we've created this exhibit in the slave cabin, and you can come and look at the primary documents, but they don't tell a story. They don't have a narrative around them. These are just artifacts. And to the average person, I'm gonna come in here and be like, oh, okay, that's a slave schedule. That's really interesting. There were people here who were 5. Whoop-de-doo. But they needed a narrative. They needed a story. We're telling the story of the Harding and Jackson family. We're literally chronicling 99 years of white history in 45 minutes, but we have nothing to say about the lives of the enslaved. And that was a problem. And so we took all those artifacts, we took statistics, we took maps and pictures, and we put them together and created what became the Journey to Jubilee tour in 2018. And it launched to critical acclaim. We've won numerous awards for it. It was amazing. I never could have imagined that talking about the ancestors would have done what it has done for me, but it's amazing. There's so much to be said. I'm so grateful for the opportunities that it's provided me.
And I feel like it's that 5-year-old asking that question of like, what? You're like, well, I'm helping her answer that question because at the time.
I am always serving my inner child. I am on a quest to just serve my inner child.
The wisdom of our inner children is something that I feel like we would be much more healed, whole, and connected if we actually allowed ourselves to honor the wisdom that we were born with, and the enoughness that we were born with, and that we didn't have to kind of battle and change and shift ourselves in order to be seen as good enough.
Absolutely.
So here's my question for you. Mm-hmm. As you're talking about this, of being, I think of the tenacious, just out of, I'm going to keep emailing you until you come back to me. I'm not going to, the resilience that you bring to that party.
Yeah.
But also, one of the things that I get met with a lot, both when I'm talking with people around navigating systems of oppression, in particular racism, how I'm just one person, what can I do? Mm-hmm. Who am I? There is so much power in honoring and understanding the power of the individual to not only activate other individuals around, but move the collective. Can you talk a little bit about what it has been like as you're talking about being the first in that space and the only person in that space kind of asking those questions and being a representative, and then returning back to then activate a whole new element of Belle Meade's programming? Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like, knowing that we all do have other people around us as we started? We've got our own proverbial team in life, but also sometimes you are just one person making a difference. Can you talk
absolutely.
about what that's been like for you?
Man, it has been a roller coaster. I have had some extreme highs as far as it has really launched me into my authenticity on a deeper level. So I went through this weird phase in college where I was trying to buff away my rougher edges, because my Instagram handle is the Hood Historian, because I like people to understand that, yes, I am educated, and yes, I am articulate. But if you see me standing on a couch drinking tequila out of a bottle with a chicken wing screaming Young Jeezy lyrics, I don't want you to think that I am no longer smart, because these two dualities exist within one being. So I want that to always be front and center, that I'm always going to be me and bring my full self into a space. So in regards to your question, I think it has always been a challenge to maintain and stand on it. I think that over time, being the having to be the voice for this type of work, has put me in a position to have to question, what does authentic mean? Because I'm speaking essentially for the entire Black race in that regard, because I'm talking about an institution that affected the vast majority of Black people in America. Although you yourself, if you were born in the 90s or anytime after 1865, you yourself was not a slave. Absolutely, we get that. But this institution permeated America, and it's still permeating descendants of that institution today. And I don't like to talk about Black people as if we are a monolith, because we are so very different, which is why I like to always make known that even though I'm hood, I also played the violin, and I also sang in the opera. Like, there's so many different facets to what Blackness is. And I think that when we start to think about what it means to stand in these spaces and to represent this history, I think it's important to always know that, and speaking for myself, that I have always tried to showcase all of our aspects, all of our beautiful colors and shades and facets. Some of the most brilliant people I know come from the communities that are directly affected by enslavement until this very day. And no, they may not have the PhD, they may not have the MBA, but they have been through and survived some things that you, with your PhD and your MBA, could not navigate.
Yes. There's, I feel like I've been mentioning this a lot in episodes lately, but there was a symposium that I watched online. It was a bell hook symposium, and one of the elements they were talking about was how we need to really, and we already have started to, but shift to prioritize and honor the power of memoir as history.
Oh,
And as
yes.
data and as important PhD level wisdom, that lived experience is just as, if not more so, in certain situations, important information, data for us to be able to understand our history, our present, and our future from.
I mean, that's the whole basis for people getting honorary PhDs, is that you have done enough through your life experience that we are going to award you this degree. We're going to confer it to you as if you have done the coursework, because you have. That coursework just didn't include a 30-page, 12.5 APA style essay.
Right, and the gate kept process of getting in.
Right, which
is a huge part of access, even, that keeps many people from being seen as viable voices or experts in a space where they've lived, breathed, and known it in their bones and in their ancestral lineage more than you've known it from reading 3 books.
And I mean, even just the institution of education, especially higher education, is very classist and elitist in its foundational values. I think one of the earliest things that I was told when Journey to Jubilee first started, there's a notable historian here who I have a lot of great respect for, but very early on, she told me that I couldn't be considered an actual historian because I didn't have a master's. And I was like, oh, girl, oh, excuse me. As you are on my tour, that's one that I created. But it was a moment of defiance for me, because you're never gonna tell me what I can't do or what I can't be.
Right.
I take every no with like a laugh, because watch. So
accepted.
challenge accepted.
Yes.
And so to fast forward now, for her to not only acknowledge me as a historian, but to have sat on panels next to her, various panels, and curated experiences alongside her and other people who occupy this space as a doctor. And I don't in no way knock a PhD. I think that is an amazing accomplishment. But I do think it's something to analyze, because as a historian, most historians don't make a whole lot of money.
Right.
So you want me to go take out more debt that I'm gonna make? Where's the return on my investment here? Because baby, I can read the book for free, or at least $45.99.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think the funny thing is, oftentimes when we're talking about where we are in this moment and understanding where we have been as a collective American identity and prior to America existing, it is so important for us to understand and honor the fact that in order for us to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, for those of you listening, I'm using air quotes, there were a lot of people that weren't seen as enough, but formed the fabric, the foundation, and the culture of what we claim to be, but would not be seen as viable historians or viable members of society, wouldn't be able to be sitting at tables where decisions are being made, and yet enforced influence that in a lot of different ways. And I think, as we have historians being able to share stories from different perspectives in the same old, we start to have this experience of, oh wait, maybe I don't know what I think I do. So can you talk a little bit about, one of my favorite, well, there's a lot of favorite parts of your mom story, but one of my favorite parts was you talking about creating space to activate the empathy in those around you, to understand that the experience that they may have seen history from is not the only, and giving them the opportunity to see through the eyes of others. Can you talk a little bit about what that, what the progression to that was? I know as somebody that's holding space, I'm sure it evolved over time. But what that kind of prioritizing, that necessity to like feel the humanity in people that haven't necessarily been given that that right, was like and has been since you've been kind of growing and evolving this work to have people really get a deep internalized sense of the reality of what that was at the time and how it influences today.
So in that portion of the tour, it's a very emotionally charged portion of the tour. So I've done this, we've gone through the statistics. We know 11% and 35% in 1852, and we've done the dates in the historical part. And by this point, we're looking at slavery as an institution. I like to paint the hypocrisy of the Confederacy and the lost cause, but I'm not going to just call them hypocritical. I'm going to give you the information so you can draw your own conclusion, and I'm gonna just leave you there and let you be like, I didn't know that that's what that did. I didn't know that this law was passed after this law because this law says that these people couldn't do this, and this was like, to realize that all of these things were systematically put in place to legitimately stop Black people from being free and having access to the same things that white Americans did in that time period. But the way that it came out, as emotional as it came out, was me asking, putting people into the shoes of every person involved in the scenario of biracial babies being created on plantations, and saying, well, let's look at it from the perspective of Master's wife and how she feeds into this system and how that entails her relationship to this enslaved woman who has no choice in the situation, and then how she handles having this child and what that feels like to be the mother of this enslaved biracial child who I can see his father, but his father only views this child as property, and the mistress of the home is probably abusive to me and my child out of her own guilt. Understandable. And then being the child and how it must be to be on a plantation as a child and know that this is my biological father. He would sell me today. And what if that enslaved woman had a husband, and how does he feel knowing his wife is being raped? And all of these different players in this ecosystem that they called a plantation. What does that do to the psyche? Mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually? It honestly came out of anger the first time, and I just blurted it out, like exactly how I tell it on the Moth is exactly how it happened. I just kind of got lost in space, in time, and my own family history, and I'm standing in front of 30 white people crying and clicking about how does it feel. And as I came out of that trance, I remember looking around the room and everybody was like, oh my God.
You're like, okay, you feel it too. Good. Yeah.
Oh, that wasn't just me? Oh, okay. Like literally people's faces are beet red. I have grown white men in tears. And I remember thinking to myself that this is it. Right. This is my journey to Jubilee. And now I got to go remember what I said. And try to recreate this over time. And I did it. And it became one of the things, like my tour was that. So if you get hired at Belle Meade, you have to come take my tour because I want to introduce you to the emotion of this institution. So as you're here drinking your wine, because Belle Meade is also a winery, and you're planning your wedding, because people do have weddings on plantations. I want you to understand that this may be a space of beauty and joy for you as you frolic under 100-year-old magnolia trees with your blackberry wine. For somebody, this was a living hell. And for somebody's descendants, this is a traumatic experience to be here today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it brings you to reality, to somebody else's reality. Yeah. Because you don't have to. The average white American doesn't have to leave their bubble. No. And I wish I want to live in a bubble.
Well, and it's not even that they don't have to, it's that and we as a collective are constantly being inundated with messages to forget and act like, erase, omit. Mm-hmm. It's not, this isn't a comfort, it's my comfort. No, it's a systematic erasure. Yep. Of an experience of pain, harm, trauma, genocidal tendencies being inflicted on an entire race of people that then also was being extracted to build the most successful economy in the world. And so how can we hold all of those realities in the same space? Which I love that you say this, because it makes me think of how you're talking about, here's how I'm showing up on Instagram. Here's all the facets and the parts of who I am. To be a human being, we have to be able to hold multiple things being true at once and be given the permission to process that. And, I think what you just said about having everybody crying or having everybody emotional, oftentimes we're not given the permission, or our audience members do not give themselves permission to meet you on that human level, to be able to feel what you're feeling, to be able to talk about or even entertain these kind of, oh, well, I wasn't alive, you weren't alive, my parents weren't alive. That's a wonderful deflection from a very human visceral experience of the history that we come from. And again, even if you don't come, your descendant lineage doesn't come from this spot on this land, it is impacting the way the world around you works. It is impacting how you're showing up in space right now. You're still feeling the spirit of all that happened here. And so how powerful it is to honor and acknowledge without, because I think oftentimes, and I'd love to hear your thought on this, I think oftentimes we get clouded by shame, and it stops us from actually interacting with the real information. And it sounds like you kind of, the beauty of powerful anger, right? The emotion can unlock those things. That space.
I think that it was always interesting to have Black people and white people on my tour, to see the difference, but yet the similarity in the emotion. Because as I'm saying these things, as I'm going through this very emotional part of the tour, and it was always very abrupt. So I literally go through this big emotionally charged, like, how does it feel? How does it feel? And then I would just cut it and be like, all right, now we're going to go upstairs. And you have people like, what? What happened? But for Black people, you would always see them like head and hands, like they're just right. It's like listening to a sermon. Black people are in those moments, we're very expressive. So you usually got like somebody over here sounding like they in like Sunday service, like talk to them, like talk about it. Like, and I love those moments because you feel it. And I know that you feeling it is different than this 42-year-old white couple here who is like silently just with their head in between their hands, like rocking back and forth as if they're being indicted. And because I'm not trying to indict you, what I'm doing is offering you a perspective that you have never had to see before.
Yes.
You've never looked at a Black person and thought, wonder what would it be like to be Black? Because what it would be like to be Black means that you have to understand the history of Black people in America. That's why I'm so pro me being hood, because my family hood because we're poor because of economic inequality. There was economic inequality because my family are the descendants of the enslaved, and economic equality was like all of this goes together.
Right,
So
right.
for
It's
you to
all part
tell
of the same.
it's a
Yeah,
part of the same system. So you can't tell me to be uh part of the Black elite because I don't come from that. Even if I get to that, that's a whole nother layer of Black American history to have to dive into to address the differences between the Black elite and the rest of the Black world.
right. And the other thing that's so interesting, and I mean, I'm sure it's intentional, is how the choice to be abrupt is
Mm-hmm.
also putting you in the shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
you, in those moments, it wasn't like, okay, let's really process all this. No, 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 you got to keep doing your day. You got to
Because when
keep
you Black, you keep moving.
yeah,
It's traumatic.
yeah.
But I just saw someone post on Facebook the other day, a friend of mine, that said, Black people don't have time to be depressed because you got bills to pay. Like, yeah, I mean, you can be depressed. You still gotta go to work in the morning.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
mom
Well,
was depressed many days.
and how I think there is something that's so important too, as we acknowledge, and honor collective grief. Again, the last
Mhm.
few years of COVID, at the very least, if you've never experienced
Yeah,
grief,
yeah.
loss, discomfort, lack of freedom, whatever you call whatever this was for you, you've had to grapple with the fact that there are things that happen that are outside of your control that impact you negatively, and you have to deal with your emotions. They're going to be staring you right in front of your face, right?
Yeah.
But then to understand, not only that, not only we have a society that like makes you feel ashamed for having emotions and feelings, and depending on your identity, certain levels and certain types of emotion are allowed to show more than others,
Mm-hmm.
but also the understanding that these things are passed down, that it's
Mm-hmm.
not just you from the day you were born to the day you're no longer here. That's the collective experience of your emotion and your
Mm-hmm.
patterning, but that there is a residual passed down generational trauma element to this
Yeah.
that, is impacting us individually, but again, impacting each of us as a collective, is within the collective as well. And how important it is
Yeah.
to, okay, maybe we won't be able to have the time, but to even just say that it's happening, how
Mm-hmm.
powerful that is. And I think, again,
Yeah.
encouraging people, even if it's going to be for a quick, that we're in this room and this is what we're doing in our time in the room,
Yeah.
it's encouraged to activate your empathy, but also to feel
Mm-hmm.
even the gross, disgusting, icky,
Mm-hmm.
shameful emotions. That's
Mm-hmm.
important for us to be whole humans.
Because I want you to sit with that. So when I would abruptly end it, we're going to go upstairs to the second floor because the tour would take place throughout the service area. So we're going to go through like the kitchen house, and we're going to go up the stairs that the enslaved would have used, because of course they're not going to use the main stairway in the house. And we're going to go through all the servants' doors and entrances as we move through the tour. And because my goal is to put you in their shoes for just a moment. But as I move through the tour, so the tour starts in 1807, we end in 20 whatever year we were in at that time, which was like 2018, 2019-ish. And I think by the end of it, I'm telling my story at the very end. So I can remember the end of my tour being a question to the audience and saying, what does freedom look like to people who have never seen it before? Because for so many Black people, our experience has been slavery, Jim Crow, the Ku Klux Klan, and then a desegregation, more Ku Klux Klan as a result of desegregation. And then you get a heroin epidemic, a crack epidemic, mass incarceration. And then we got Obama, so all as well, right? And then you see people like, wow. And I would say now, as I stand in front of you today, at that point, I was like 28. I'm a descendant of enslaved people in Grand Junction, Tennessee. My grandmother was born in 1925. That means that her grandmother was born enslaved. My grandmother was high yellow because of the generations of her family that have biracial babies that influence her skin color. So when my grandmother in 2005 was telling me not to go outside and play too long in the sun because it was going to make me Black, that was her passing down her trauma. So what does that say about where we are? Are we that far removed?
I'd say no, but I don't know. We leave that space for those listeners. Are we? Do you feel far removed? Because I sure as hell don't.
Yeah.
And I think the other part to this too, that you tie such a beautiful like thread through, is that, okay, maybe we don't have chattel slavery in America anymore, but we sure as hell have remnants of, and not even remnants, direct lineage to how we operate, how our economy still operates when we look at mass incarceration and how that works. We even look out the legalization of marijuana and how that's been handled, and still people are incarcerated. So even as we change laws, and it actually is still the residual of, well, this economy cannot stay up, or we cannot find ourselves within the stacking order if we actually allow everybody to be treated as a
Right.
who would I be if?
Who am I if you're equal?
Right.
Because, you know, the wild thing, and, you know, from working so closely with predominantly white people for so long, and most of my coworkers I've worked with at this point, almost 10 years. So we've had times and growing pains, and, you know, we're all getting to know one another. And because I'm not the traditional, I guess, palatable Black person that comes in a space and wants to make you comfortable, you have to get comfortable with this. And over time, we've had the hard conversations as a staff, and eventually just as two people having a dialogue, and they get to ask those hard questions. And I think that as a result of that, Belle Meade as an institution has fostered an environment and a culture with our historic interpretation that allows us to draw those through lines that a lot of spaces and places are afraid of. The average plantation home is going to talk about the history of the enslaved in a very siloed way, from 18 whatever or 17 whatever, depending on how old this home is, until 1865. Once you get past 1865, we're not talking about it anymore unless we talk about the direct descendants who may have played a role on this plantation or farm post-emancipation. We're not going to talk about how slavery has a direct relation to why this community over here was impoverished, or why the legacy of Tulsa, Oklahoma is the legacy of Tulsa, Oklahoma, because enslaved people moved west after emancipation, trying to flee the South. I mean, there's just so many ties and things that I wanted to make sure that people hit, because I felt like, weirdly, that the weight of this story was on my shoulders at that point. And I felt like it was my duty to tell you 200 years of history in an hour and a half in a way that gets you to feel it. I would be exhausted at the end of the day. And I did that 3 times a day, 5 days a week.
And did you have a, I want to say, how did you refill your energy tank other than the feeling of, okay, this is something I have to do? I can only imagine, because not only are you holding space for your own emotions and feelings, you're, as a facilitator, as someone that holds space, you're taking on, as much as you want them to experience their own, you're still feeling. Again, the inherent empathy in creating that space means that you are absorbing as a sponge some of theirs.
Yeah, if I could have $1 for the amount of hugs that I gave out after giving Journey to Jubilee tours, like, can I hug you?
Yeah.
Which I get, but it's also kind of strange, because I think that the average white person has a very interesting way of dealing with their emotions when it comes to race and racism. And usually the response is not action. The response is not, how can I be an ally? It's, I'm sorry to you. So I'm going to hug you and alleviate my awkward feelings here. And then I'm going to go back into my bubble and just tell all of my friends at the country club, oh, there's this wonderful Black girl down at that plantation in Tennessee. You must go see her. But for my own emotional alleviation, I didn't take work home. Like, once I was done with Journey, I was done with Journey. I'm not one of those, and don't get me wrong, I live to work. I love what I do. It's very much so passion-based work for me. But I got a life outside of work. I like to party. I like to kick it. I don't let that consume me. And I have colleagues who literally, like, they eat, sleep, and breathe the revolution. I get it, power to the people. But
But also,
right. I wish we could have seen Dr. King take a shot. I wish we could have seen Malcolm X kick off his shoes and, like, do the twist or something. Like, understanding that these individuals who carried these revolutions on their back were also individuals who were not perfect. They were flawed, but they were gifted. They were godsends, but they were people.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
don't have to wear the revolution anymore. I think that that is putting too much on Black people, because it's, even though my freedom, the fight for my freedom is my responsibility, what is not my responsibility is carrying it by myself because you choose not to see why this is important.
Oof.
That's your problem.
I'm not going to carry your part. I'm not going to do both parts of the seesaw.
No,
Seesaw doesn't work that
no.
way.
So you want me to alleviate your emotion while telling you that your emotion is rooted in the victimization of people that look like me. So now I got to be the victim and the savior, ma'am.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the phrases that you talk about is reparative action.
Yeah.
And I know that not only is it in these tours, but you're working with communities and corporate spaces in the company that you created, the organization you created to take this work to not just be that, oh, this nice girl that did this thing. Let me
Yeah.
tell you, here's where you should go. But like, all right, how are we going to actually make this live outside of this space, live outside of this tour? How
Yeah.
can we bring this to present day action? And can you talk a little bit about what reparative action is all about, how it manifests in the work that you do, and how people might be able to kind of engage with or understand that for themselves, and how they, again, no matter what their background, understanding how we can actually, instead of it being us versus them,
Yeah.
it be something that can actually have us collaboratively working towards a more healed present and future.
So reparative action is, honestly, it started out as a fancy way for me to say reparations that didn't scare the shit out of my board. Like, not even gonna lie. But I think that reparations is an action. To repair what has been broken requires action. So beyond the financial contribution, there's so many ways that you can act to help repair something. So for Belle Meade, the first step in reparative action was absolutely the tour itself. It was acknowledging that this history existed, acknowledging that it hurt people, acknowledging that it disenfranchised an entire community of people, which would be Black Nashvillians and their descendants, and those from Belle Meade and surrounding areas. Because when I talk about the descendant community, I'm not just talking about Belle Meade. I'm talking about every Black person in America who is a descendant of American chattel enslavement. It was a way to authentically and accurately depict how horrible of an institution slavery was, and to de-myth the myth of the good or kind slave owner, the paternalistic institution. It was complicated, but what we're not going to do is say that this was a good institution. He was a kind owner because he fed them and clothed them, sir.
We're not romanticizing this.
Be for real. We're not going to romanticize this. And so once we did the tour and we were actively engaging with North Nashville and historic Edge Hill, which are some of the historically Black communities in Nashville, and we were hosting events and having Juneteenth and having Black History Month programs. So we're taking baby steps to have these conversations here on the site and have Black people come here and speak their truth. Now we got to put our money where our mouth is, right? And so I'm a graduate of Tennessee State University, which is a historically Black college here in Nashville. And TSU was a public institution. It was a land grant college. And ironically, some of the grounds that make up what is Tennessee State today, or parts of Tennessee State, was a plantation in the antebellum era. So it all worked out. And we decided that we were going to create a scholarship fund for Black freshmen who want to come to TSU and major in Black history. So it's a $10,000 scholarship that goes out once a year to a freshman. And it's just an incentive for you to look at this, because although there are a lot of Black historians, I don't think enough Black youth are seeing the importance of telling these stories beyond doing the research, beyond just holding space to tell the stories.
Yeah.
I'm a person about the story. I think the story is so powerful, and to encourage more people to want to be the griot of this history, and hold it and cherish it and pass it on to the next generation and the previous generation, because interpretation changes as the people who are interpreting change.
Sure.
So pushing new perspectives. But moving from that, we've partnered with Tommy Hilfiger to donate a coat to every student inside of John Early Museum Magnet Middle School, which is a Title I middle school here in Nashville, Title I being a school with high minority, high poverty rates. We have, of course, we did that for the students. We also partnered with the Nashville Predators, which is our hockey team, and they fed all of the teachers lunch. One time, we do pumpkin patches and donations for pumpkin patches and Halloween candy, and honestly, anything that I can do with Belle Meade's money, I will do with Belle Meade's money to assist. Of course, we know that slavery as an institution is something that can never be rectified. What was done is done. But what we can do is to assist the descendants today.
Yes. It's so funny. I just felt the 5-year-old version of you come back in this, like the thing that's so, I think, powerful, pivotal, as you're talking about encouraging generations to continue to build on the work of what history looks like, what historians look like, what historians, what the letters at the end of their name are or not,
Or not, yeah.
be a historian. And also understanding that though we have the incredible access to the internet is lacking so many of our stories. So many Black stories in particular have been, if they are there, have been redacted in a lot of ways, have been erased, have been completely nullified, or have been romanticized. And what it is to actually allow ourselves to do that excavation work of taking off the costumes and the masks that we're putting on the stories we know, or finding and humanizing the ones that have been shoved to the side, and how important that is. When I think, again, we live, I just read an article. No, let me not say that. I read the beginning of an article, because at this point you can get a lot in like 37 characters. But it was talking about how our attention span has moved from 2 minutes to 47 seconds or something like that. And so when we acknowledge the way that we consume information is changing and shifting, and that the amount of information that is out there isn't actually everything, even though it feels pervasive, how important it is for people who are native to current technology to be able to understand how you can bring that history to the forefront and honor, right, where we are right now, at least the way that I think about this, like the foundation of all this shit is crumbling. Like, let's acknowledge that everything seems to be breaking around us, and we're like the ducks, but the underwater, our legs are going like crazy. Like, this is the moment where you actually allow for the cracks to show the things that have been hidden underneath. And without more people feeling as though it's important and powerful for them to be able to use their voice and to be able to share their story, but also stories that haven't been there, is creating a new way of operating with one another. It's creating, my hope, is creating a more whole, human, and connected way of doing that, if we actually allow ourselves to feel the myriad of all the emotions and realize as human beings, it's kind of imperative for us to feel that, or our bodies shut down.
You have to constantly keep yourself in a state of discomfort, because I mean, learning is uncomfortable, because you it's always something that you don't know. I know Beyonce said in her documentary when she was doing Coachella about how practice humbles people, because it shows you basically what you're not good at and what you're not great at. People hate to, especially people who consider themselves an expert at something. You don't want to practice because I'm good at it, right? So as a person who has made and is making a living off of telling the stories, the ugly stories, the happy stories, telling the stories of a people, I can't just act as though Black people are the only people who've had a hard time in America. We have had a historically really jacked up time. I'm never going to negate that. But something that I actively try to do is to look at the stories of refugees. What is it like to be a Middle Eastern or a Haitian refugee over here? What does it look like to not have a green card? That's a whole different level of struggle and strife. What does it look like to be Latin American or Mexican and have to deal with ICE on a regular basis and worry about what's going on at home because the cartel is running your community? Like, this is not something that I have to experience, but can I not feel empathy for them? Absolutely I can.
Right.
Because that is hard. And it's things that they deal with that I couldn't.
Right.
And I think that constantly keeping yourself in a state of discomfort in regards to how that allows you to see other people is one of the best things that we can do as a race of people, because you have to be able to feel your fellow human. We'll do so much more if we can come together than we'll ever do if we continue to push each other apart.
To be honest,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot. It's being curious, being
Mm-hmm.
uncertain, and being okay with being uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
It's what makes life something
Mm-hmm.
worth living every day, to be able to learn and see. And at least personally, let me say this, one of my favorite things to do is be in a state of awe, whether that's good,
Yes.
bad, or otherwise. Being opened up to a part of this existence that I was not aware of before
Right.
is such an important and integral part of being here. If not,
Yeah.
what's the point? Just going through the motions of what I did yesterday?
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'm the smartest person in the room, then I'm in the wrong room.
Oh my goodness. And likely, and let's be honest, even if you're the smartest person in one thing, you are not in all things. So being able to allow yourself to understand that there is something that everybody can contribute if we give people the opportunity to feel as though they are viable and valuable.
Yeah. I agree.
Okay, so I feel like I could talk to you for a million years.
I know, same.
One of the things that I think is so powerful, and I witness, and why I create this podcast in the first place, and I know as a fellow lover of story, you've created many aspects of your life around this. Can you talk about what it has been like as you are taking all of this story? You're here right now sharing your story.
Mm-hmm.
What that process has been like for you? Being on the Moth stage, being on TV, being all these things of just sharing your lived experience as hood historian, as that 5-year-old, as the 28-year-old, as all the different versions of yourself who is standing up and is like, hey, what's going on? Let's talk about it. Can you talk about what that has been like in witnessing not only yourself share your story, but other people interact with and learn from, grow from, and connect with you from it?
Man, it is dreaming come true, because it's not over. So it's not a dream come true. It's dreaming coming true. For me, it is exhilarating. I live for the stage. I live for public speaking engagements. I thrive off of people. I am an extrovert. By the time that I need some time to myself, I have probably been outside for 2 weeks doing my thing. I should be sitting down by the time I need a minute. But it's been a wonderful journey, man. And to know and to think that people see so much value in not only myself, but my story and the stories that I hold within and the stories that I find importance in. It's encouraging, it is uplifting, and it keeps me on my toes, because I have to constantly remember why I do this. It keeps me passionate, because you can't do this work and then get into an interview or public speaking engagement and sound like Eeyore, because then we don't want to talk to you. But I couldn't love it anymore. I mean, I could make some more money. That would be beautiful.
Manifesting it. Keep going now.
Yeah, I could make some more money, but just on the passion itself and the work and seeing people be enthralled with it. Like after the New York show, my DMs were like, I was like, how did y'all find me?
Because you are, and let me say, you are not easy to find.
It's like, how did y'all find me? Which is interesting because I'm Googleable. Like you could Google me, but you have to Google me in connection with Belle Meade, and then it's 17 pages of stuff. But so I guess a goal should be you be able to just Google Bridget and it come up and not Belle Meade. But then another story, another day. But I think it's been a beautiful journey. I wouldn't trade it for nothing in the world. I've loved every minute of it. I'm still loving every minute of it, and I can't wait to see more of the fullness of this work.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Genuinely, I think there is, I can only imagine. I mean,
Mhm.
to tell you the activation that you brought to that, at least personally for me in that
Mhm.
room, that the amount of, we were in a church, everybody that wasn't there, like the moth experience was in a space that you were expected
Mhm.
to kind of, especially it was this big, there's all the fanfare behind you, like dark light. I was at a table,
Yeah.
candlelight, like there was all this kind of,
Yeah.
it feels like you could have popped up with that violin and sang some opera too, and it would have fit in there, right?
Yeah.
Because the woman
Yeah.
was playing violin.
Yeah.
And how my body actually could not stay silent. I was going, yep, and I was like, no, Nikki, this is not this. Let her talk. Do not. You're recording
No,
your
I
stomach.
love those reactions. They're
But
so
whew,
encouraging to me.
so I can only imagine being in that experience. And I hope for those of you that are listening, if you're having that experience of Brigette telling your story to be like, ooh, yep, yes, I want to, yes, like trust that. Allow for more of that to be part
Yeah.
of your way of interacting with yourself, with those
Yeah.
around you. And Brigette, how can people get in touch with you if they are interested in learning more, coming to Belle Meade, learning? Because one of the things I am so excited about is that I believe that the blueprint you have created by being yourself is something that's replicable. And again, when you are centering authenticity as the way to do that, that's, to me, that is like the self-sustaining energy that is a
Mhm.
beautiful thing. So how can people get in touch with you to connect, learn more, maybe come for a tour or experience
Yes,
aspects of the
please
work?
come for a tour. We need journey gnomes to stay up so I keep my job, I guess. No. So I do a lot of my promotions and stuff. I keep people updated on where I'm going to be through my Instagram. So on Instagram, I am at the Hood Historian, and on Twitter, and to be fully transparent, my Twitter is just a tad bit more ratchet than my my Instagram. It's like Twitter is like for my friends, Instagram is like for my friends and my colleagues, and Facebook is like my family. It's like my auntie. They get on there and say stuff like, very cute, love auntie. Like, I know who this is. Uh, it says it right there, but what else? But yeah, so on Twitter, it's at ADA_BOW, and you'll see the Hood Historian as my tagline. Ironically, the Hood Historian was taken on Twitter, which was awkward because I couldn't think of anybody else who wanted to do that, but what else? And on Facebook, it's my full name. So that's Brigette, Brigitte, Janea, Janea, and Jones.
Well, I am so incredibly grateful for you spending time today. I'm so excited for everybody that's getting a chance to listen to this and meet you.
Yay!
Um, please keep me updated. I will shout anything that you'd like for me to shout from the rooftops.
Thank
We are so
you.
very lucky to have had you join today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor and a wonderful conversation.
I hope that you appreciated and loved that conversation as much as I did be in it. Brigette is such an incredible light and gift to, I will tell you, my path and my world. It was such a treat to be able to walk into that moth experience and come out on the other side, knowing more about Brigitte's story and then having the opportunity to connect with her. So if you were feeling inspired to learn more, to get connected, please reach out to Brigette. If you didn't catch all the information that she shared in the episode, we'll have it on show notes. You can go to nikkyinnocent.com/podcast and you will see her name on there and you can get all the information. So I hope that this activated something in you to be able to live more authentically, to really honor and understand all the complex emotions that come across as we start to learn about our history and we understand the things that have impacted us, both good, bad, and otherwise. And I can't wait to see you on the next episode.